The hospital woke up before the sun. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above long hallways that smelled of disinfectant and fresh coffee. Stretchers rolled by. Shoes squeaked. Voices stayed low, like everyone understood this place carried more than sickness. It carried fear, hope, and moments that changed people forever. She arrived early, like she always did. Her wheelchair moved quietly across the smooth floor, guided by steady hands that had learned patience the hard way. She wore a simple nurse's uniform, neatly pressed, her badge clipped straight. It still felt strange seeing that badge on her chest. Rookie nurse. New hire. Temporary contract. Words that followed her like a shadow. Some people noticed her the moment she entered the ward. Others pretended not to. A few stared too long, then looked away, uncomfortable. She was used to it. The wheelchair always spoke before she could. She had not always lived this way. Years ago, she had been on her feet, running late, laughing, planning a future that felt endless. One accident changed that. Metal, glass, darkness, and then waking up to silence and still legs. Doctors had used careful words. Recovery, limits, adjustment. What they had not measured was her stubborn heart. Rehab had been slow and painful. Some days, she cried when no one was around. Other days, she trained until her arms burned, learning how to move again in a different way. When she said she wanted to become a nurse, even then, people tried to soften the truth for her. Long hours, physical strain, stress. She heard them all. She still applied. Now she was here, rolling into the ward with quiet breath, ready to prove, again, that she belonged. Her supervisor gave her a quick nod. Not warm, not cold, just professional. She was still being watched, still being measured. Mistakes were not something she could afford. She checked charts, prepared supplies, and greeted patients with a gentle voice. Some smiled back, some looked surprised. One elderly woman squeezed her hand and said, "You're doing just fine, dear." That small moment stayed with her. Late afternoon brought heavier air. The emergency doors slid open again and again. Sirens echoed outside. Tension climbed. She noticed security standing straighter, nurses moving faster. Then they came in. 6 men at first, then 2 more behind them. Big frames. Rough clothes. Faces marked by old fights and hard nights. Some were bleeding. One limped badly. Another held his ribs and cursed loudly. Their voices filled the hallway, breaking the usual hospital calm. Nurses exchanged looks. A doctor sighed under his breath. These were not ordinary patients. They laughed too loudly, ignored instructions, and pushed past rules like they did not apply to them. One of them knocked over a chair and didn't bother to pick it up. Another made a joke that drew sharp looks from staff. Security tried to guide them, but even they were careful. No one wanted trouble. The charge nurse looked down at the assignment board, then at her. "You'll take room 3, she said, voice flat. The rookie nurse followed her gaze. Room 3. That was where 3 of the men were being sent. For a second, her chest tightened. She nodded anyway. She rolled toward the room, repeating procedures in her head. Assess injuries. Stay calm. Keep distance. Call for help if needed. Her hands stayed steady, even if her thoughts raced. As she entered, the room smelled of sweat and metal. One man lay on the bed, arm wrapped roughly. Another sat on a chair, tapping his foot. The third leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp. They looked at her. Then they looked at the wheelchair. Silence hung for a beat. Then one of them laughed. "Is this a joke?" he said. Another smirked. "They running out of real nurses now." The third leaned forward, eyes scanning her up and down. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost?" Her face warmed, but her voice stayed even. She introduced herself, explained she would be checking their vitals. The man on the bed snorted. "How you gonna help anyone from down there?" The words landed hard. She ignored the comment and reached for the blood pressure cuff. As she did, one of them rolled his chair back, blocking her space. "Careful," he said. "Don't roll over your own foot." They laughed again. Outside the room, footsteps slowed. A nurse paused, then kept walking. No one stepped in. She felt it then. Not just embarrassment. Isolation. Her fingers trembled for a second, She paused, took a breath, and continued. She had learned long ago that reacting only gave people what they wanted. "I need you to sit still," she said calmly. "Or what?" one of them replied. "You gonna chase me?" Another burst out laughing. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed focused. She finished the check, noted swelling, cleaned a wound. Her movements were careful, practiced. Despite the noise, despite the mocking, she did her job. That seemed to irritate them more. "You think you're some kind of hero," one said, "playing nurse." She finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Not angry, not scared, just firm. "I'm here to help," she said. "That's all." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Then it was gone. "Yeah," he muttered. "Sure you are." When she rolled out of the room, her back felt tight. She didn't stop until she reached the supply area. There, alone, she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her reflection stared back at her in the metal cabinet. Same uniform, same chair, same tired eyes that refused to quit. She thought about leaving, just for a second, about asking for reassignment, about choosing an easier shift. Then she remembered nights in rehab when no one thought she'd finish. She remembered promises she made to herself in the dark. She straightened her shoulders. The shift went on. More comments followed when she returned. More jokes. One of them called her Wheels. Another asked if she needed help reaching the bed. Each time, she answered with professionalism. Each time, she documented carefully. Her voice never rose. Her hands never rushed. She noticed something else too. One of the men, the quietest one, watched her closely. He didn't laugh as much. When the others spoke, his jaw tightened. When she checked the patient on the bed, he paid attention, eyes sharp, assessing. At one point, she caught him looking at her hands. Not mocking, measuring. Their eyes met briefly. He looked away. Near the end of her round, a doctor finally entered. He barely glanced at her before addressing the men. Questions were asked. Orders were given. The men settled, bored now. As she prepared to leave again, one of them called out, "Hey!" She turned. "Next time," he said with a grin, "send someone who can stand." The doctor chuckled awkwardly. No one corrected him. She nodded once and rolled out. The hallway felt longer this time. Her arms ached, not from the chair, from holding herself together. At the nurse's station, she updated charts. Her supervisor scanned them, surprised. "You handled that?" she asked. "Yes," she replied. A pause. Then a simple, "Okay." No praise. No comfort. Just okay. The hospital lights dimmed as evening approached. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. She finished her tasks, unaware that what seemed like just another hard shift was quietly setting the stage for something much bigger. She didn't know yet that the men who laughed would soon fall silent. She didn't know that respect was closer than it seemed. For now, she just kept working, pushing forward in her chair, do what she came here to do. Care for others, even when no one cared for her. The hospital felt heavier as night fell. The halls were quieter, but not empty. Machines hummed softly in every room, reminders that life and death were only walls apart. She rolled down the corridor, supplies in her lap, charts tucked under one arm. Her shift had been long, but she still had rounds to finish. The quiet gave her a moment to breathe, to remind herself why she was here, why she refused to quit. When she reached the room where the men had been, she froze. The group had grown louder since earlier. Their voices carried down the hall, even before she got close. She paused at the doorway, her hands gripping the wheels tightly. She could feel the tension in the air like static, prickling her skin. The first man, the one who had laughed the most at her wheelchair, leaned back in the bed, smirking. Another sat on a chair, arms crossed, looking like he owned the world. The third had pushed the nurse aside earlier, now tapping his foot impatiently. Their energy filled the room, sharp and uncomfortable, like it could cut anyone who dared to challenge them. As soon as she entered, one of them called out, "Hey, Princess, you rolling in again? Thought you were done." His voice was loud, teasing, meant to put her on edge. She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, steady calm. "I'm here to check your vitals," she said softly. Let's get started." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Vitals? From that chair? Don't make me laugh." She ignored the jab, wheeling closer to the first patient. She could feel the weight of their stares, the energy of their mockery pressing down on her. Other staff lingered nearby, pretending not to watch. Some seemed afraid. Some didn't want to get involved. She knew this feeling. It was the same one she had faced in therapy, the same one that came with every challenge after her accident. A quiet voice in her head reminded her that she could handle it, that she had been through worse, and that giving it now would make all the effort she had put in meaningless. One of the men leaned forward. "Careful there. Don't fall over." Her hands tightened around the wheels. "I've got this," she said. "Now please, just sit still for a minute while I check your pulse." He scoffed, but didn't move. Another rolled his eyes. A nurse had passed by, glancing the room, but she had kept walking. No one wanted to risk angering them. The tension was thick. As she placed her stethoscope on the first man's chest, she could hear his shallow breathing. She adjusted it carefully, listening, noting every detail. She could feel his heart racing, and she tried not to react to the loud laughter and mocking comments around her. Her mind stayed focused, only on the patient, only on her duty. "You know," the man in the chair said, "you could try standing up. Might help you do your job better." She didn't answer. She simply continued, moving from patient to patient, documenting everything carefully. Her movements were precise, deliberate. Every touch, every word, every glance was calculated to maintain control of the situation. But they weren't done. The first man leaned back and waved his hand dismissively. "I don't need some rookie telling me what to do. Step aside, girl. Let the Real nurse handle this." Her chest tightened, but she stayed silent. Instead of arguing, she focused on stabilizing the injuries she saw, checking wounds that had been ignored, adjusting bandages that had been applied poorly. She moved with care, as if her calmness could somehow balance the storm around her. Then one of them laughed and said something cruel about her accident, about her wheelchair, about how she would never manage in a hospital like this. It hit harder than the others because it was personal. She stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. She could feel her heart racing, but she refused to let it show. She reminded herself that anger would only give them more power. Patience was her strength. "Do your job," she said quietly, "and I'll do mine." The men laughed again, but the tone had shifted slightly. They were expecting her to break, to argue, to cry. Instead, she had simply continued. She finished a vitals check, cleaned a wound that had started to fester, and carefully adjusted the bandages. She moved from patient to patient with the same steady calm, her presence quiet but firm. A few moments later, a sudden noise made everyone jump. One of the men groaned, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. The first one yelled something at him, and suddenly the room was chaos. The man's breathing was uneven, shallow. She immediately rolled closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I need you to breathe slowly." The others stopped laughing, tension filling the room. Even the man who had mocked her the most looked unsettled. For a moment, the power shifted. They realized she knew what she was doing. She wasn't just a rookie. She wasn't just a woman in a wheelchair. She was someone who could act when others panicked, someone who could stabilize the situation. She adjusted the oxygen mask, checked the four-line, and monitored his pulse. She called for the doctor, explained the sudden change, and kept her hands calm and deliberate. The patient's groans lessened as she worked, her voice soothing but authoritative. The men were quiet now. Their laughter was gone. The fear and respect in their eyes were unmistakable, even if they would not admit it. They were realizing that the person they had mocked and humiliated had just held a life steady when things got real. Time seemed to stretch in those moments. Outside the room, the hospital continued its quiet rhythm. Machines hummed, nurses moved, and the distant sound of sirens echoed in the night. Inside, however, the rookie nurse held the attention and focus of everyone in the room. She had earned a silent, grudging respect through her actions, not words. The doctor arrived a few minutes later, moving quickly to assess the patient. He glanced at her, eyebrows raised slightly, surprised at how stable the patient already was. "You did well," he said quietly, almost under his breath. She nodded, not letting the praise change her composure. Her focus was still on the patients, still on keeping the situation under control. The men remained seated, watching her. The one who had been the loudest now shifted uncomfortably. He muttered something to the others, but they said nothing. Their previous arrogance had faded. As she continued her rounds, she noticed small changes. One man, who had been the quietest all day, now followed her movements closely. He asked a question, not mocking, just genuine curiosity. She answered, keeping her tone even and professional. Slowly, she realized that her actions were beginning to break through her defenses. Even if only a little, the rest of the shift continued with careful attention. She managed medications, checked wounds, and documented everything precisely. The men still muttered occasionally, still made jokes, but the laughter lacked its earlier cruelty. Something had shifted. Her presence was no longer just tolerated. It was acknowledged. When the shift finally ended, she rolled back to the nurse's station. Her arms ached her. Body was tired, but there was a quiet satisfaction she felt deep in her chest. She had faced ridicule, mockery, and disbelief, yet she continued to do her job with focus and care. Her supervisor looked at her, nodding briefly. "Room 3 was different tonight," she said. "Yes," she replied simply. She didn't elaborate. No one needed to know how much effort it had taken to stay calm, to hold herself together under the weight of mockery and aggression. The hospital lights dimmed further. Outside, the rain fell heavier, tapping against the windows in steady rhythm. She wheeled herself to a quiet corner, took a moment to breathe, and reminded herself that tomorrow would bring another shift, another challenge. But she also knew deep down that something had changed tonight. She had survived ridicule. She had maintained control. And in doing so, she had earned a quiet power that no one could take away. As she left the ward, the men's voices faded behind her, replaced by the soft hum of machines and the distant echo of footsteps. She didn't know it yet, but her actions that night were only the beginning. Something bigger was coming. Something that would test her courage and determination even more. For now, though, she allowed herself a small, private victory. She had not been broken. She had not been defeated. She had proven to herself quietly that she could stand firm even when the world tried to knock her down. And that strength, unseen by most, was a foundation of what was about to unfold. The night had grown darker, the rain tapping steadily against the hospital windows. The quiet hum of machines and the occasional call from a distant nurse filled the hallways. She was rolling down the corridor again, her arms steady, her mind focused. The events earlier in the evening had left her tired, but not defeated. Something inside told her the night was far from over. She approached the room where the men were staying. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices inside. The man who had been the quiet observer was talking, but the others were laughing and joking, their earlier tension gone. Or so it seemed. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before entering. Her hands gripped the wheels, steady and deliberate. As she entered, she immediately sensed a change. One of the men on the bed shifted suddenly, a groan escaping him. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His hand clutched his chest. I can't breathe," he gasped. The room, which had been filled with laughter minutes before, turned silent. The others froze. The man who had mocked her earlier barked out an order to call the doctor, but the phone was on the other side of the room. Panic flashed in their eyes, a stark contrast to the arrogance they had carried before. She wheeled closer, her voice calm but firm. "Stay with me. Look at me. I'm not leaving. You're going to be okay." He tried to speak, but his words came out as gasps. She adjusted his position slightly, supporting him as best she could from her wheelchair. Her hands moved with precision, checking his pulse, monitoring his breathing, ensuring his airway stayed clear. Her mind was a whirlwind of protocols, past training and emergency procedures. One of the men, the loudest and most aggressive earlier, stepped forward, confusion and fear replacing his previous mockery. What are you doing?" he asked, almost unable to comprehend that the small, quiet nurse in a wheelchair could handle the situation. "I'm keeping him alive," she said, her voice steady. "Now help me keep him calm." Everyone else, Step back and let me work." They hesitated. None of them had ever seen her like this. They had laughed. They had mocked. They had assumed she was fragile and weak. But now, faced with a real emergency, she was in control. Their disbelief hung in the air like thick smoke. She reached for the oxygen mask and adjusted it carefully, checking the flow and making sure it was properly positioned. She guided his breathing, instructing him to inhale slowly, exhale slowly. She kept her hands on his shoulders, giving him something solid, something reliable to hold on to. "Stay with me," she repeated. "You're going to be okay. I need you to breathe." Minutes felt like hours. Outside the room, footsteps moved quickly, nurses and security drawn by the commotion. The doctor arrived, moving fast. But even he paused when he saw her steady hands, her calm demeanor, the way she had already stabilized the patient as much as possible. "You've done well," he said quietly, almost under his breath. "I can take over now." She nodded, stepping back slightly but keeping her eyes on the patient. Even as the doctor worked, her presence had a stabilizing effect on everyone in the room. The men, once mocking and aggressive, now watched silently, respect growing in their eyes, unspoken but undeniable. The patient's breathing began to ease. His pulse stabilized and color slowly returned to his face. She monitored every change, adjusting medications and oxygen as needed, ensuring nothing was left to chance. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, even as the room held its collective breath. The man who had been the quiet observer finally spoke. You really know what you're doing," he said, his voice low, filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. "I'm here to do my job," she said. "That's all." Another moment of silence passed. The loudest man, who had taunted her relentlessly, shifted uncomfortably. He muttered something under his breath, something she didn't catch, but it was different from the cruel words he had used earlier. Something had changed. He no longer saw her as just a rookie or someone to mock. He saw competence, courage, and calm under pressure. The doctor finished stabilizing the patient and gave her a brief nod of approval. "You've done good work tonight," he said. "I'm glad you were here." She nodded again, keeping her expression neutral. Praise was not her goal tonight. Keeping the patient alive was. That was enough. The men sat quietly now, their earlier arrogance replaced by a strange, hesitant respect. They exchanged glances, realizing they had underestimated her. The woman in the wheelchair, the rookie nurse, had acted decisively when they were unable to control even the simplest emergency. A few minutes later, the patient's breathing became steady enough that the doctor could leave the room with confidence, leaving her to monitor him through the night. She documented every detail carefully, noting how the crisis had unfolded, the steps she had taken, and the patient's response. Accuracy was vital. Her mind stayed sharp, precise, professional. She took a moment to look at the man. The one who had mocked her most earlier met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw hesitation, uncertainty, and perhaps even respect. He did not speak. He did not joke. He simply watched, silently acknowledging the strength she had shown. The quiet observer finally said, "You're tougher than I thought." She gave a small nod. "I have to be," she replied. "It's part of the job." The others shifted in their seats. The energy in the room had changed completely. What had begun as mockery and ridicule had become something else entirely. They were no longer laughing at her. They were realizing that she had handled a crisis they could not. They were seeing her skill, her courage, and her resolve. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The room was still tense, but the worst of the chaos had passed. She had faced not only the emergency but the ridicule, and she had come through. She had proven to herself and to them that she could handle the pressure. The rain outside continued to fall, steady and calming, a rhythm that matched the slowly returning calm in the room. She rolled her chair slightly to the side, checking supplies, adjusting equipment, making sure everything was in order. Her mind remained alert, ready for anything, but the immediate danger had passed. The men no longer spoke. They watched her, their earlier arrogance gone. She had earned something without words, without confrontation. They had seen her act under pressure, and it had left an impression they could not ignore. She knew the night was far from over. Hospitals were full of surprises, and she had learned never to assume safety until the shift was done. But for now, she had proven something to herself. She had faced fear, ridicule, and chaos, and she had remained steady. She had acted with calm, precision, and courage when it mattered most. As the night deepened, she continued her rounds. She checked on the patient once more, ensured the others were comfortable, and documented every detail meticulously. Her hands ached. Her body was tired, but she stayed focused. She knew that moments like these were what shaped a nurse, what defined professional. By the time her shift was nearing its end, the energy in the room had shifted completely. The men, who had mocked her first, now watched her with quiet acknowledgement. They had learned something they had not expected. Strength did not always come in loud voices or tall frames. Sometimes it came in quiet determination, calm hands, and a mind that refused to panic under pressure. She wheeled herself back to the nurse's station, exhausted but steady. Her supervisor looked at her, surprised by her composure. "Room 3, that was intense," she said softly. "Yes," she replied simply, keeping her tone neutral. She did not need to elaborate. The events had spoken for themselves. Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Inside, the hospital returned to its quiet hum, machines and monitors marking the passage of time. She allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. She had faced fear, ridicule, and an emergency that could have ended badly. She had handled it all with focus, care, and courage. But she also knew that the night was far from over. Challenges were waiting just beyond the next hallway, and she would meet them, as she had always done, with quiet determination, skill, and an unyielding sense of duty. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She had faced mockery and fear. She had remained calm. She had acted decisively when it mattered most. And in that room, in the middle of chaos, she had proven something vital. Not just the men who had doubted her, but to herself. She was not just a rookie nurse. She was someone who could hold the line when it mattered, someone who could act under pressure, and someone who would not be underestimated again. And she knew, deep down, that this night was only the beginning of what she would face and overcome. The hospital halls were quiet, almost eerily so, as if the events earlier in the evening had left a mark on every person inside. She moved through the corridors with her usual steady rhythm, pushing the wheelchair forward with deliberate calm. Her body ached from hours of maneuvering, from staying on alert, from responding to emergencies, but her mind was alert and focused. Something in the air told her the night was far from over. As she approached the room where the men were staying, she noticed a shift. The tension from earlier still lingered, but now it was different. The men were quieter than before, subdued almost, watching her as she rolled inside. Their earlier arrogance and mocking laughter had faded. Respect, hesitant and unspoken, had begun to take its place. Before she could reach the patient's side, the emergency doors burst open. 8 men entered the hallway, moving with the precision of people trained for high-stakes situations. Their presence was commanding yet calm. Each one wore a serious expression, eyes scanning the room as they moved forward. The air changed instantly. It was impossible to miss the weight they carried with them. She paused for a moment, surprised. The men in the room shifted nervously, some stiffening, some staring. Their earlier confidence evaporated as they realized who had entered. They whispered to one another, uncertain, cautious, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. The leader of the group approached slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. He looked at her, then at the patients, then back at her. "You handle this well," he said, voice calm but firm. His words were measured, carrying respect without exaggeration. She nodded, keeping her composure. "I did what I could," she replied softly. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart raced. She had seen people in uniforms before, authority figures, but there was something different about these men. They carried a presence that demanded attention without raising a hand. The leader's eyes flicked to the patient she had stabilized. "We appreciate your work. You kept him alive until we arrived," he said. There was no question in his voice, no doubt, just acknowledgement of what she had done. The men she had been treating watched in silence. Their earlier taunts seemed meaningless now. One of them swallowed hard, as if trying to grasp the reality of the situation. The woman in the wheelchair, the rookie nurse they had mocked, had handled a life-and-death emergency with skill, composure, and courage. And now, these new men, these figures of authority, were confirming what they had only begun to realize. She was not to be underestimated. The leader spoke again, glancing briefly at the other men in the room. "We're here to ensure his safety and to make sure no one else gets hurt. Everyone stay calm." The room seemed to shrink in size, the energy shifting completely. The loudest man, the one who had mocked her the most, looked around nervously. He muttered something under his breath, but no one else laughed. He realized that the situation had changed beyond anything he could control. She wheeled closer to the patient, checking the oxygen mask and foreline, ensuring everything remained stable. The men from earlier shifted quietly, some looking guilty, others unsure how to react. She maintained her professional focus, her hand steady, her voice calm. One of the SEALs approached the patient, assessing him quickly but efficiently. He glanced at her, nodding slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of her competence. She returned the nod, keeping her expression neutral, but inside she felt a quiet relief. Her efforts had not gone unnoticed. The SEALs moved with coordinated precision, organizing the patient and assessing the room for any potential threats. Their presence was reassuring to some and intimidating to others. The men she had been treating shrank back, realizing that their mockery had been foolish, that their earlier arrogance had no place in the room anymore. The leader spoke quietly, almost conversationally, to her. "You remained calm when things were critical. That's not common. Not everyone could do what you did." She nodded again. "I just focused on my patient. That's my job," she said. She didn't want to exaggerate her actions. She simply did what she had been trained to do, the way she had practiced countless times in simulations, drills, and quiet moments alone. The men she had been treating watched the interactions silently. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that they had misjudged her. The quiet observer from afore shifted uncomfortably, his eyes meeting hers briefly. There was no laughter now, no teasing, only acknowledgement. They had been shown, without words or force, that she was capable, skilled, and deserving of respect. The SEALs moved through the room with careful, deliberate actions, ensuring the patient was fully stabilized and that nothing would go wrong before they transported him. She stayed close, assisting where necessary, handing equipment when asked, keeping her movements precise and professional. One of the SEALs, younger than the others, glanced at her. "You did exactly what was needed," he said. Not everyone could stay calm under pressure. Her chest warmed slightly, but she did not let it show. "I was trained for emergencies," she replied simply. The words were true, but they felt small compared to the acknowledgement she had received. Outside the room, the rest of the hospital seemed to pause, as if sensing the gravity of what was happening. Other staff moved quietly, giving space. Even security, who had been cautious all night, now watched respectfully from a distance. The energy in the room was entirely different from before. The patient, once pale and panicked, now lay stable, breathing steadily under the careful monitoring of the SEALs and her continued oversight. The room, once chaotic with laughter and mockery, was calm, almost reverent. The loudest man, who had mocked her most earlier, finally spoke, his voice low. I didn't expect," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The quiet observer, who had watched her closely all evening, finally spoke as well. You were incredible. I don't think anyone here could have done what you did." She nodded once, quietly, letting their words linger in the air. She didn't need their praise. She had done her duty, and that was enough. The leader of the SEALs stepped forward, addressing the group in the room. "This nurse showed courage, skill, and calm under pressure. That deserves respect. Not just from me, but from everyone here." The men in the room shifted, some swallowing hard, others nodding slightly. Their earlier arrogance had dissolved completely. They had been forced to witness professionalism and competence in its purest form, and it had left an impression they could not ignore. She wheeled herself closer to the door, ready to give the SEALs space to work, but they stopped her. "Stay," the leader said. "You're part of this too." For a moment, she hesitated, then nodded. She realized that, in a strange way, she had become part of something bigger. She had earned a place, even if quietly, in this moment of critical action. The SEALs moved to transport the patient safely, coordinating smoothly with each other and with her. She assisted where necessary, making sure nothing was overlooked. Every movement was precise, efficient, and professional. When the patient was ready, the leader turned to her. "Your actions tonight saved him. That's not something everyone could do. You earned our respect." She nodded again, keeping her expression neutral, though inside, a quiet pride stirred. She had faced ridicule, fear, and the impossible, and she had prevailed. The men she had been treating now watched silently, realizing the truth. They had mocked her, underestimated her, and treated her with disdain. But she had proven herself not through words or anger, but through calm, decisive action under pressure. As the SEALs wheeled the patient away, she stayed behind, documenting every detail, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. The room was quiet, the machines humming softly, the storm outside fading. The men remained seated, subdued and thoughtful. Their earlier mockery had vanished completely. They had witnessed courage, skill, and calm in the face of fear, and it had left a mark they could not erase. She finally wheeled back to the nurse's station, exhausted but steady. Her supervisor met her gaze, surprise and approval in her eyes. "I've never seen anything like that," she said softly. "I did what I had to do," she replied simply. Her focus remained on her duty, on the patients, on the work. Praise was secondary. Responsibility was primary. The hospital continued its quiet rhythm. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and calm. Inside, she had proven something vital, not just to the men who had doubted her, but to herself. She was not just a rookie nurse. She was someone capable of holding the line when it mattered, someone who could remain calm under pressure, and someone who would not be underestimated again. And as the night continued, she knew that the events she had faced were only the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, more crises to face. But for now, she allowed herself a brief moment of quiet pride. She had faced fear, ridicule, and chaos, and she had emerged strong, respected, and unbroken. The quiet in the hospital was a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier, but she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had acted decisively. She had earned respect through her actions. And she knew deep inside that this night had changed more than just a patient's life. It had changed hers as well. The hospital had settled into a quiet rhythm as dawn approached. The emergency lights dimmed to their soft glow. Machines hummed steadily, and the occasional footsteps of a night shift nurse echoed down the corridors. She wheeled herself down the hall, her arms tired but steady, her mind replaying the events of the night. Nothing had prepared her for what had happened, yet she had made it through. The men she had cared for were still in the room, now calm, subdued, and thoughtful. Their earlier arrogance and mockery were gone, replaced by something deeper. Respect, grudging and quiet, but real. The one who had laughed the loudest before was no longer laughing at anyone. The quiet observer watched her with a new understanding, the kind that comes when someone has seen courage and skill in action. The hospital staff had begun their early morning routines. Doctors and nurses moved quietly, some glancing toward the room where the SEALs had entered, recognizing the shift in atmosphere. News of the incident was spreading, not in loud words, but in whispers. Everyone who had witnessed it understood that something remarkable had happened. She paused at the nurse's station to update charts, her hands moving efficiently despite exhaustion. Her mind kept track of every detail, every medication, every intervention. Documentation was her responsibility, her way of ensuring that no mistake could overshadow the work she had done. As she finished, the room door opened and the 8 SEALs returned. Their presence filled the hallway immediately. Even those who had seen them before felt the weight of authority and precision they carried. The leader of the group approached her, calm but deliberate, eyes steady and unreadable. "You handled yourself well," he said, voice firm but not harsh. "You didn't panic. You acted with skill and courage." She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. Praise was not her goal, yet she could not deny the quiet pride that warmed her chest. She had faced ridicule, hostility, and a sudden life-or-death situation. She had emerged steady, calm, and in control. That acknowledgement mattered. The men in the room shifted uncomfortably. Their earlier mockery now seemed small and meaningless. They had underestimated her, judged her based on appearances, and had been proven wrong. The experience had forced them to see her in a new light, not as a rookie, not as someone limited by a wheelchair, but as a capable professional who could act decisively when it mattered. The leader of the SEALs gestured to the patient. "We're taking him to a secure area now. You stabilize him. That matters." She nodded again, moving to assist where needed. Even as the patient was carefully transported, she ensured every line, every monitor, every precaution was accounted for. Her attention to detail had not gone unnoticed. The SEALs acknowledged her quietly, subtle gestures of approval that carried more weight than words. Once the patient was safely in their care, the men she had treated earlier remained seated. The room was silent, except for the soft of machines. One of the quieter men finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant. I didn't think anyone could do what you did, especially not like this. Not like you." She looked at him, keeping her tone steady. "I did what I had to do. That's all." He swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. The arrogance he had carried earlier was gone. Respect, reluctant but genuine, had replaced it. He had witnessed someone act under pressure, and he understood, perhaps for the first time, what courage looked like in action. The loudest man, who had mocked her most, spoke as well. You earned it," he said simply. The words were short, almost awkward, but they were honest. No laughter, no sarcasm. Just recognition of her skill, her bravery, and her composure. She nodded once, acknowledging their words without letting them distract her from her work. Her focus remained on her duty, on the patients, and on maintaining the calm she had fought so hard to preserve throughout the night. Outside the room, the hospital continued its quiet rhythm. The night shift staff moved efficiently, quietly discussing the events in hushed tones. Whispers carried stories of her calmness under pressure, her skill in stabilizing the patient, and the unexpected arrival of the SEALs. Even those who had doubted her now seemed to see her in a new light. The leader of the SEALs approached her again. "You should know," he said, "that what you did tonight doesn't go unnoticed. Your actions saved a life. That is something few people can claim." She nodded, keeping her face neutral. Words of praise felt unnecessary. The fact that she had acted correctly, that she had remained calm and effective when it mattered, was enough. But inside, a quiet sense of accomplishment settled. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and fear, and she had emerged unbroken. The men in the room now watched silently. The loudest, the most aggressive, had lowered his head slightly, the first sign of humility she had seen from him. The quiet observer met her gaze briefly, a subtle nod of acknowledgement passing between them. They had learned something important tonight. Appearances could deceive, and strength often came in unexpected forms. As the SEALs prepared to leave, the leader addressed the room one final time. This nurse showed calm skill and courage under pressure. That deserves respect. From everyone here. Remember that. The words hung in the air. The men shifted in their seats, the weight of their earlier behavior pressing on them. They had laughed, mocked, and assumed superiority. They had been humbled not by force, but by competence and courage. The lesson was clear, and they could not ignore it. She wheeled herself back toward the nurse's station, her arms aching but steady. Her supervisor met her gaze, surprise and quiet approval in her eyes. I didn't expect that," she said softly. "I did what was needed," she replied simply. Her tone was calm, professional. She did not need to explain further. The work had spoken for itself. The hospital began to stir with the approaching dawn. Early morning staff arrived, unaware of the events that had unfolded overnight. Machines hummed, monitors beeped, and the soft footsteps of nurses and aides filled the hallways. The night shift was ending, but the memory of what had occurred would linger. She took a moment to pause, rolling to a quiet corner. Her body was tired, her arms sore, but her mind was clear. She had faced fear, ridicule, and a sudden life-threatening emergency. She had acted decisively, professionally, and with courage. And she had earned respect, not just from the SEALs, but from the men who had doubted her, from her colleagues, and most importantly, from herself. The men she had treated earlier remained seated, thoughtful. Their laughter and mockery were gone. They had learned a lesson in humility and respect that words alone could not teach. They had witnessed someone act with quiet strength, calm focus, and unwavering dedication. That lesson would not be forgotten. She wheeled herself back to the nurse's station one last time before her shift ended. Charts updated, equipment stored, supplies organized, everything in order, everything accounted for. Her job was done, for now. The SEALs had left, taking the stabilized patient with them, their presence still echoing in the memory of everyone in the room. The men who had mocked her now sat quietly, processing the events, the lesson, and the undeniable fact that she had proven herself in every way that mattered. She allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction. She had faced ridicule, hostility, and fear, and she had come through stronger, steadier, and more confident than ever. The wheelchair she sat in, once a symbol of limitation in the eyes of others, had not held her back. Her skill, courage, and determination had defined her, not her physical condition. The hospital continued its quiet rhythm as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world washed clean and calm. Inside, she had proven something essential, not just to the men who had doubted her, not just to the SEALs, not just to her colleagues, but to herself. She was not a rookie to be underestimated. She was professional, capable of acting decisively under pressure, deserving of respect, and unbroken by ridicule or fear. She had faced the impossible and emerged steady, calm, and resolute. As she prepared to leave for the day, she glanced back at the room where the men had stayed. The silence was respectful, almost reverent. They had learned that strength did not always come in loud voices or broad shoulders. Sometimes it came in quiet determination, calm hands, and a mind that refused to panic when it mattered most. She wheeled toward the exit, the early morning light warming her face. Her body was tired, her arms sore, but her spirit was strong. The events of the night had tested her, challenged her, and proven her resilience. She had earned her place, her respect, and her confidence, not by seeking it, but by acting with courage, skill, and unwavering professionalism. And as she left the hospital, the world outside calm and quiet, she knew that she had changed, not just in the eyes of those around her, but in the most important way, in her own. She had faced fear and mockery, and she had emerged not only unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The night had been long, the challenges fierce, and the lessons unforgettable. She had proved once and for all that courage is not always loud, respect is not always demanded, and strength is not always visible. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and undeniable, and it can change everything. The men she had treated would never forget. The hospital staff would talk quietly about the nurse who had faced ridicule and crisis without faltering. And she herself would carry the memory, the lesson, and the quiet pride of knowing that she had risen above it all, steady, strong, and unbroken. The day had begun, and with it came new patients, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove herself. But for that night, she could finally allow herself a moment of peace, a moment of quiet pride, knowing she had faced the impossible and had won, not with anger or force, but with skill, courage, and heart.